Please take a seat so that we can start the next to last working session of the Time Use Week. Now we're going to be talking about key solutions for the 21st century challenges, talking about the right to time. This is going to be a bilingual session, so we'd like to remind those of you who need simultaneous interpreting, you can take one of the interpretation devices so you can listen to the session, and there'll also be online speakers, and we'll be listening to them using the screens we have in the room. As I said, this working session on the right to time, we'll be talking about key solutions for the challenges that we face in the 21st century. In fact, the right to time and time policies has been defended by local authorities and in general also by governments. So what we'll be doing here is to listen to our speakers, precisely look from these different levels in order to analyze the challenges of this new century. So I now like to ask the speakers to come up. First of all, Marina Lafay. She is Deputy Mayor of the Strasbourg City Council and Metropolitan Councillor of the Strasbourg Eurometropolis. So welcome. Please take a seat. On the other hand, we have also with us, in this case following online, Petra Zuropsinova. She's Head of Innovation, Strategic Innovation at the UNDP. So, good afternoon, welcome, and thank you for participating in this session on the strategies for time use. Online also we'll have Klaes Michael Stahl, Deputy Secretary General for the European Trade Union Confederation, also online. So welcome to the session. And we also have with us Mr. Moron, who is from the Secretary of State for Work Department of the Spanish government. So please come and take a seat here so that he can participate also. Ricardo Moron. Good afternoon and welcome to this session. And we will excuse Hugo Lachapelle, President of the International Association for Time Use Research, and due to a last-minute issue, will not be with us this afternoon. And, however, we'd like to thank him very much for his will to be here. So, if you let me, I'll sit down here with you. Now, my first question is for you, Ms. Lafay. In this case, we'd like to hear what the challenges that have to be met when it comes to the right to time and time policies. What are the challenges?
There is perhaps three aspects for me. The first one was mentioned before, is the question of the data. We have to collect more data, qualitative and quantitative data, to inform with indicators the administration of our city and also, especially, the politician to put the subject on the table during the campaign, for instance. And we have explained also that the World Bank recognizes the time poverty, but I was before an anthropologist, but in a sociodemographic laboratory, and it was not well known, this topic of this word of time poverty. In few studies also, we can see that they are focused on south parts of the world, but not on the north. And it is a problem and nonsense for me that if we heard, for instance, the German philosopher Hermann Rosa, he explained that there is a big link between our types of modernity, industry and society and capitalism, and lack of time. So it's more important to collect data, especially in north of the world and in Europe. The second aspect of show also, which is very crucial, that it's also explained well known by Armand Rosa, that in our society we suffer of lack of time, and also we suffer from a phenomena of that acceleration, and to fight against that and to save life balance, we have also to think in public policy, some concrete proposal to slow down. And it's not very simple, but it is a need to make some proposals. For instance, in Strasbourg, we improve some new types of bench. There is also in Barcelona the super block. It's a possibility also to slow down. And in the same case, and city of Rennes has improved it, we have to promote also the laziness, the break time. It is a little bit taboo in this capitalism system here. And so we have to revalue it, and also it's necessary if you want to implement also some new way of life, which is necessary to fight the climate of change. So for that we need, I think, to slow down, to develop by people a certain introspection, a reflection, to change their own way of life. And the third aspect, it's gender aspect. It's very important. It was the original purpose in time policies in Italy 2 years ago. But we have to develop that again. Yes, nowadays it's also a big fight, but I think we have to combine that with ecological also urgency in a certain way of ecofeminism. That's why it's also that I defend, I promote as a politician woman also the ideas of the feminism, intellectual feminism. Woman Gisèle Halimi, she promotes the idea of at European level, the idea of most favored European woman clause, and that's why it's very important also in our network, for instance, to exchange from our best practices, to improve them also in the law at European and general level for all countries of Europe, in Parliament and even perhaps in Council of Europe. That's the three priority, I think, for me nowadays. Yeah.
Gracias, señora Lafay. Yo le pregunto.
Thank you, Ms. Lafay. Today that we are talking so much about the way we manage time and use of time in cities and small villages, what do you consider that the right to time involves for cities and municipalities?
You want to have some example, for instance, is it? No?
En este caso,
more than anything, how do you take time management policies beyond the large cities? How can you take it to a lower level, to smaller cities, smaller villages and towns?
I think there are two possibilities in Strasbourg, in Rennes, in Paris, like in Barcelona. We have some time offices called sometimes differently, Mission des Temps, Bureau des Temps, but it's the same idea. But sometimes we have in our administration so many people who work for us, so it's not always very simple to improve some innovation. I think in the contrary that in the smaller city or villages, it's sometimes sometimes more simple because they have sometimes 2 or 3 persons who work for the city council, and necessarily they have a largest view and systemic view. And there is also some specialists in political research, Matteo Caleoni in Milano, for instance, is agree with that. He explained to me that the smaller city, it's more efficient for them to improve time policies. For instance, it was the case in North Italy at the beginning, and this city is still involved in the time policies. Cremona at the beginning, but now Bolzano or Bergamo are not bigger cities like Milano or Barcelona, for instance.
¿Es más fácil o es más?
Is it easier or is it more difficult than in large cities or small cities from the perspective of Strasbourg?
But in larger city, you have a budget for that, so it changes everything, I think. Nowadays, with inflation and difficulties, I think, yes, perhaps some small city want to improve it, but they have no the possibility to do it. But it can be also, it's a challenge for small city because they suffer from less services, and the idea of a 15-minute city can be translated also for small city. We spoke about 30-minute territories, but it's also a necessity. In France, for instance, there is many territories who suffer from less services. They have no hospital, for instance. So today it's a real problem and a democratic problem, I think.
Gracias, señora.
Thank you very much, Ms. Lassay, for your words. Now, the next question is going to be addressed to Petra Duratsinova, who's following us online. She is responsible for strategic innovation area at the UNDP. And I have a question for on the 21st century challenges, and at the top, gender inequality or climate change. So from the international perspective, how do you see time policies related precisely to these challenges that current governments have to face?
Good afternoon. Sending my regards to Barcelona. My name is Petra Dzrouchinova, and I work as a consultant for the UNDP. And at the UNDP, we are currently preparing a global event called Istanbul Innovation Days 2025. They will focus on institutional innovation. We can see the importance of institutions in the recent Nobel Prize Award for Economic Sciences. 3 established scientists, Darren Acemoglu, Simon Johnson, and James Robinson, received this award for their influential work on how institutions shape economic development. Inclusive institutions that enforce, for example, property rights, protect democracy, and limit corruption help foster economic growth. In contrast, extractive institutions will give rise to high concentration of power and limit political freedoms and seek concentrated resources in the hands of small elite and thus stifle economic development. My work for the UNDP explores the pressures we feel in society from rising climate crisis and mitigation of its risks, our shared planet and space, well-being and time, which we are discussing today, state capacity for implementation, for experimentation and learning, technological change and the role of AI, future of economy, long-termism, and future generation. It is very important to address how effectively institutions can address these challenges, because the issues we are facing today are transversal. They don't only appear in silos. And we aim to explore how we can redesign institutions to better address the complex challenges of our rapidly changing world and better address the needs of constituents. So, at Istanbul Innovation Days, we're looking at seeds of institutions that are actually on their mission to systematically change the way they are operating. Maybe let me use some examples. We talk about time, but with time there are many things related to it. So there is an NGO that operates in Uganda. It's called Strong Minds, and it focuses on treatment of depression. Depression as illness, as a mental illness, hasn't been actually recognized in Uganda before. And this organization recognized that by creating community groups to help treat depression will actually increase education outcomes and economic outcomes for the country, and also make people feel better and more valued. So through kind of understanding the needs, they were able to create a new framework, which is also recognized by the Ugandan government, and now it creates more prosperous society in Uganda. Another example is a famous initiative in Bogota called Care Blocks, because their goal is to create a support system for caretakers, offer them learning, job opportunities and facilities for them to take care of the things they need to take care of and simplify their day-to-day lives. In Latin America, there's a lot of inequality, and care blocks are actually a way for cities to create more equality, more space for informal economy, and also for the caretakers to feel valued, maybe find more work and more opportunities in their lives. And today we talk about time. Time is a big equalizer. It is equal to all of us. We can't buy it or extend it. So all these examples are connected because we are bringing in more human dignity and more solutions for a broader spectrum of constituents.
Muchas gracias por su intervención también. Y ahora, hablando de gestión.
Thank you for your contribution. Now, since we're talking about time management and time use policies, clearly one of the most complex aspects of time management is management of work time. It is one of the essential parts of our daily living, and perhaps it is one of the areas where time policies are most difficult to implement. So we give the floor to Mr. Klaus Michael Stahl, Deputy Secretary General of the European Trade Union Confederation. So the following question for you. What do you think are the key changes that need to happen and the main challenges faced in terms of managing time at work? What do you think?
Thank you very much. Thank you for this invitation, and for you that don't know the ETUC, it's the European Trade Union Confederation. We represent 45 million workers from 93 different trade union confederations and 43 countries across Europe. So it's a broad organization, and of course this is an important event today, and it's really the issues as we've discussed them today, the right to time policies, are key issues in our societies today, and very much so discussed within the trade union movement today. In fact, I would say that time management was one of the core reasons that trade unions were founded at the time when capitalism broke through, and also changing our human perception of time profoundly, I would say. It changed us then, and it keeps changing us today, and that's why I'm so happy to be in this event, because we get too little discussion on time in that sense. The starting point for trade unions is how work is organized, and of course the key issue is how much we get paid to sell our labor, often by the hour, and that's the starting point. Our manifestations and demonstrations in the 19th century and the early 20th century was 8 hours of work, 8 hours of leisure, 8 hours of sleep. And these two demands, together with democracy at large, were our great demands then, and I would say remains the core of trade unionism. Because the problem then and now remains pretty much the same. Poor organization of working time creates health issues, health problems, problems with equality, as mentioned of the previous speakers here, productivity, but also sustainability issues, which affects the whole of society. And again, also very well pointed out by the previous speakers that work time and management of time affect us differently depending on social class, gender, ethnicity, and other factors. And very simply, I would put it, if you're on the top of the social hierarchy, you will have significantly more resources to deal with your time management than if you're at the bottom, struggling and hustling, if you so want, to make ends meet. Now, as I said, working time and management of time continues to engage CTC and its affiliates. And at our latest Congress, it was decided we would support each other's campaigns across national borders for reducing our working time. We also decided to support each other in collective bargaining for this. And across Europe, we can see the demands of shorter working time. However, there is little agreement on the methods, if it should be through collective bargaining or legislation, nor do we have any joint understanding on which level, if it should be on European level, national level, cross-sectorial level, or sectorial level. And well, talking about all of this, it's also important to, and I want to put that into the equation here as well, is to discuss all the people reporting having too little working time or too much insecurity connected to the working time because of having non-fixed hours and so on. So it is, in the world of work, a complicated set of issues. But again, I believe that your initiative here is an important one because it draws the attention to the issue of time management, and I think that work is the place to address this issue primarily. I will stop there, and I hope that we can come back in a discussion a bit later. Thank you very much.
Tendremos la posibilidad de hacerlo más adelante.
Yes, we will have the chance to come back to this later. Thank you very much. But I would also like to give Mr. Moron a chance to take the floor. He's the Director General for Work in the government of Spain. The government of Spain has started to legislate on time use. And so, Mr. Moron, could you please tell us what are the current proposals and what are the challenges that we need to overcome to ensure that the right to time is enshrined for all? How is the Spanish government planning to go about it? Good afternoon. First, I would like to invite you to thank you for inviting the ministry to address this symposium. It's a very important topic. We are tackling it. I apologize on behalf of the Secretary of State, who's been unable to come due to other commitments, I'm afraid. In any case, the ministry is very grateful for this opportunity to take part in this event and highlight some salient aspects. Before I specify what proposals we are working on, if I may, I would like to talk about the baseline. What is our baseline? It's already been said, work time is something that you neither buy nor sell. Well, let's watch out with that statement. When we talk about production time, what employees are doing is selling their working time. When you rent, it's unlike renting an apartment or a facility. What you're doing is renting out your time. We're selling parts of our living hours in order to make a living. And so this all has to do with wage policies. Instead of paying 5 per hour, we were paid 25 per hour. We would need fewer hours to survive or have a decent living. So everything is interrelated. At any rate, it's important to know that when a person is working, they are selling time in their life. And sometimes they do so in a way that endangers their own health. As the European Trade Union Confederation representative just pointed out, the original trade union demands were not about increased time for leisure, amongst other things, because people couldn't afford to do anything with their leisure. The original demands were about survival, because originally with capitalism, the working day was extenuating and people only had enough time to rest, to get some basic recovery. So demands for an 8-hour working day were about basic survival. Nowadays, there are other health-related demands that have to do with organization of working time. It's about the pace of work, variation in working hours, and so on and so forth. We are increasingly coming to learn about the impact of all this on health. But anyway, our baseline is as follows. We have been working very long hours. Since 1983, the legal working day has not been reduced, although some collective bargaining agreements have reduced working hours in some very important industries. In fact, some of those industries will not be impacted in the least by the reforms that are being prepared, but other industries will be. And then there's something else. Over a few years, partly thanks to EU policies about flexicurity, where security seemed to came first and flexibility is taking some time, the fact is that there's been a change in the way time is management. Working long hours or short hours is something that has been a salient aspect of production that has ultimately been left in the hands of employers. The concentration of power is amongst employers or lies with employers, and as a result there are people who have changes in working hours, shift changes, and so on and so forth. Ultimately, working time, working hours are not just about duration of time, but also about distribution of those working hours. And that is the key issue today and probably into the future. You might work 20 or 5 hours a week, but if they're not properly distributed, they can have a huge impact on your life to such an extent that they really determine everything else, all the other hours in your life. So the way working hours are distributed really has a carry-on impact on everything else. Time for leisure, time for consumption, time for rest. Now, when I'm saying that, that doesn't mean that the other aspects and other kinds of time management are not relevant or salient. We have to have a cross-cutting perspective on every form of time if we want to be fair, not only in economic terms, but also in terms of gender and in terms of climate change and so on and so forth. But anyway, this is the baseline. This was our starting point, the situation that we needed to address. So how have we tried to address this in recent years, and what are we attempting in this regard? One aspect has been very fully developed, and that is leave arrangements. Leave arrangements are individual arrangements provided for individual employees to recover part of their time sovereignty. But leave is a restricted type of time arrangement. When maternity leave is over, then you're back into the normal desert of shift work and working hours that are structured and organized by employers, as mentioned earlier. In recent years, we've added to this another new possibility, which is the possibility for employees to request individual adaptations or adjustments of working hours. But there also needs to be a justification that involves care of minors, care of relatives. So the right to manage time on an individual basis is not yet acknowledged. Shall I keep going? Yes, well, I had asked you about the specific proposals and measures looking into the future. Well, we have two major measures. One of them is already in Parliament, and that is our transposition of transposal of the relevant directive. Which brings on some new important rules. It's not a complete change in legislation, but the new regulation requires companies to notify in advance what the work patterns are, what the potential variations are, and what the possibilities are. This is about working hours overall, in general, but also in particular for part-time employees and part-time contracts, because part-time contracts are very flexible, highly easy to modify and used in a very flexible way by companies. So these measures are already about to be debated in Parliament. Then there is the working hours reduction measure that is currently at the stage of social dialogue. We're discussing this with employers' unions and trade unions. The trade unions generally have a positive view of the government's proposals. Overall, with some criticisms, they welcome this proposal. But employers are more reluctant. An effort is being made to bring them on board, and it looks as though there is a possibility, there's a good chance, not a certainty, but a good chance that they will support it. So what are these measures? First of all, reduction of the working week from 40 hours to 37 and a half. We had thought of a level of 38 and a half hours, but we'll see how the negotiation works out. And then there's a whole debate all over Europe as to whether this should be done through collective bargaining or through legislation. But in any case, the adaptation, the specific adaptation on an industry level is referred to collective bargaining. So by law, in terms of yearly calculations, the working week is reduced with actual arrangements to be worked out. Secondly, there is the matter of changing arrangements for keeping track of working hours, because if you make everything very flexible, there needs to be good control and oversight. Otherwise, it's pointless. And here I could talk about digitized, interoperable tracking of working hours with a direct connection for labor inspectors and so on and so forth. Thirdly, reinforcement of a regulation that has not finally yet been adopted in the European Union. That is the regulation on the right to disconnect. Some trade unions and some employers' unions have reached a national collective bargaining agreement on this right, however. And together with this, we have some ancillary aspects. One is the toughening of penalties. There are some developments that are not currently penalized. Situations where companies exploit their workers until their extenuation. It's close to slavery. Workers working 14 or 15 hours a day with just one day off a week. It's very close to slavery, and this is a very serious infringement on limitations on working hours. And in addition to this, in order to make things easier in certain industries, and particularly amongst SMEs and for self-employed workers who have employees themselves, Well, there is some support and incentives and training assistance and assistance in reorganizing time and so on and so forth. I apologize for speaking for so long. No, sure. I mean, when you ask about goals for the future, obviously a government must have many goals for the future, particularly in matters as cross-cutting and broad as time use management and working hours policies. We will now have a second round of contributions in the same order that we just followed. But please wear your institutional hat when you answer my question. My question is, what is the homework that you are setting for your own institution? You, of course, sir, have already pointed out what homework has been set by your government. But what should be prioritized? Ms. Lafay, what are the priorities that the city of Strasbourg should have in terms of prioritizing time use?
We test also some change and of work, but and also the 4-day week. But it must be combined with the question of gender inequalities. If it increase gender equalities, it could be perhaps not a good idea. But our priority today is also the main topics of our event in November, because we are now, yes, we are proud to be the World Capital of Time for 2024 until March 2025. And in November we organize also an event about the question of care. Care for the others and care for themselves. So it's also the question of right to time, and I think we have introduced this topic today. But in this topic also what is very important is to consider the question of time integrating children's rights. That is perhaps not well known, but for instance there is also many children who are caregivers and perhaps have difficulties to learn at school and are tired and suffer from problem of mental health also. And yes, we want to develop that. That is a need also. I'm also president of Tempo Territorial, and we develop actually a reflection about the question of right to time, especially for young people. And what is also interesting that in Strasbourg we have signed a UN declaration, we have signed the UN Charter, City of Children, and that we have the obligation also to consider this question, but with the expression of the children themselves. And I think it's also, I mentioned that we have to collect some data and perhaps also improve new methods. There is a French researcher in France who have proposed some method to collect data about the needs of children, but expressed by the children themselves, about the right to time. And I think also it's very interesting, and so we will continue on this topic. For instance, recently the team in nursery, public nursery city, they improve a day without clock. To be more adapt about the need of the children and biological aspect, but it's also a question of freedom, also what they want to do. And yes, we have many possibilities, but I think it's very important to test some new approach with the children themselves. That's the new idea, but I think we have a lot to do. There is a lack, I think, it's in time policies about that.
Perspectiva interesante esta la de vivir.
That's a very interesting perspective. Living without a watch, without a clock. That's the perspective of children. Thank you very much, Ms. Lafay. And now, Ms. Jurovchinova, what's the homework that you would like to set for your own institution? What are the most immediate challenges for your organization?
Thank you very much. So what we are trying to achieve right now is to find examples of good institutions around the world, or seeds of institutions that can serve as an example for others that are trying to make things better. When we look at successful institutions, it's usually they have multiple factors. They looked from outside in, they collaborate across different sectors. So when you're trying to solve one challenge, for example, climate neutrality or going circular, you can't just do it from the Ministry of Environment. You have to cooperate with the Ministry of Economy. You have to think about universities. You need to involve the business sector and so on. So looking at these seeds and highlighting them in the event which I already mentioned. For me, also quite important is inviting stakeholders that are usually not around the table. So, for example, when it comes to climate change, thinking about nature as a stakeholder, and also when we think about climate change, then thinking about the future generations, what kind of world we will live for them. And then when it comes, for example, to participation and democracy, involving young people that are facing multiple problems with employment, with mental health, and trying to show them different ways of being engaged. So to sum it up, institutions and the challenges we're facing are very complex, and I think it requires a brave and curious skill set of workers or public servants that are trying to actually deliver for their constituents.
Muchas gracias por su intervención también y por plantearnos estos retos.
Thank you very much for your answers and for talking about these challenges. And I now want to launch the same question for Mr. Stoll from the perspective of the world of work. What are the immediate challenges? What is most urgent right now in that field?
Well, most urgently, I think it is to get a common view within the European trade union movement on how to go forward. I think it's very difficult. As I said, it's a very broad organization with organizations from many different corners of Europe. So I think that's one of the low-hanging or high-hanging fruits, whatever I should say. But I want to connect a bit to the Spanish colleague because he really pointed out what I think is the core issue, and that is the baselines of work time and how it's used and how it's functioning. And we're going back to the basics in many ways. And I think power has to be set at the center of this discussion, because power on the labor market defines what arrangements that can be done. So of course, if for groups that have less of social power, there will be less scope to deal with the challenges that time gives. But power is also important for the methods that one chooses to go forward with, mostly at national level. So depending on the power strength you have, it could even be through collective bargaining or through legislation, through the states, which are two ways forward. Problem, of course, is that if none of those are being used, it will be the employers that continues, as they have done for the last 10, 20, 30 years, increasingly so, call the shots on the labor market. I think that's not the place where we continue to be. So either going forward with legislation or collective bargaining. I'm not going to say which one, because I don't have a mandate for that. I also want to connect the discussion a little bit again, as I said, going back to the basics. And I think we also have to look at the needs that are today. So if the needs of our foremothers or forefathers, they're very much about dealing with time constraints as a physical need. I think what we see today is time management as a need to deal with mental and psychological and stress at work perspective. So working time is also becoming important for us in how we live our inner lives in a way that is important. I also want to bring in, and I think it's important, the issue of cities and how we plan our cities and how we live our lives in our cities, because increasingly we can see that it's getting more and more difficult to actually work in the very same city that you live in, because of travel distances, commuting, and all of that, and it brings us also into the housing element of time, and I think it's important to remember, if the people that makes our cities possible cannot live in the very same cities where they work, well, then there is a fundamental problem to deal with it. And to wrap up, a little bit philosophical maybe, but still, I do think that it was capitalism as a system that introduced time as we know it today, coordination and cooperation across cities, across borders, and across countries in different ways. And of course, throwing out time entirely, living without clocks, it's a wishful place to go, of course. And my kids do live there most of the time. But I do think we shouldn't go that far maybe in our time management, because that could create other problems. Anyway, I'm very happy to listen to this discussion, because it's a good one. Thank you.
Gracias a usted.
Thank you very much, Mr. Starr. I was listening and I was seeing Charles Chaplin in modern times a bit there, as a metaphor of that factory working at top speed with those very fast working rhythms. And now I give the floor to Mr. Moron, who you heard also questions from your colleagues. So immediate challenges. Well, I coincide with what we've just heard. I also want to launch a mid and long-term challenge, which is that we need more time to be freer, to be able to develop more fully as a person. Now, this is something that's not quite as philosophical. I am provisionally a member of the ministry of the government. I'm a university professor. And when I explain who may have access to certain types of leave or whatever, my students say, so what about we who do not have children, elderly parents, or do not find ourselves in dramatic situations? We have no right to striking a work-life balance? Well, yes, that's so. I go to music lessons twice a week of a saxophonist. And if I worked at a company that kept changing my work shifts whenever they felt like it, that would be terrible for me. And maybe if I had that bargaining power to negotiate with the company or leave the company, because the goal to be freer, to be happier, well, that is there. So let's go take it step by step. I think one of the great challenges is co-responsibility. The most democratic and participatory management of working hours will be, and I'm not saying this because there's a majority of women here, but that movement is going to be led by women, just as at the time they were the ones leading the process that led to achieving maternity leaves because of the role that was allocated to them. So it's true that those situations and that right to leave has been recognized when women came into the job market, and where there was a competition between family life and professional life. I think that the next process is going to be the struggle led by women, and obviously all the rest of us have to also be present there in that struggle. Men have to be there, and that is co-responsibility, because if there's no co-responsibility, time management is going to be discriminatory. It's going to be unequal. If there's no corrective factor outside the company itself, but also within the company. So we need to be able to design public policies that go in depth and that ensure that co-responsibility is a necessary part of the way we manage time within the at work, because that's going to be really important. But sometimes in productive spheres, it was men that had one role, which was to bring as much money home as possible, working overtime and so on, and women had a different role in life. But we've seen cases of this in collective bargainings where there are special leaves that are offered to some types of people, sometimes to the mother, sometimes to the father. So we have to be very careful when we think about these things. But there is still a lot of bones to pick. For instance, now when it comes to salary transparency directives that need to be transposed in order to fight against discrimination, what is the key element here? And this is a question that I also ask my students in class. Why do 80% of leave go to women? And students come up with all kinds of comments because women prefer to take off work themselves, because children love their mothers more, because mothers love their kids more. But when you look at how things really are, when a couple sits down and decides on who's going to give up work, it's usually a financial factor that's behind it. So the person who earns less is the one that's going to sacrifice part or all their time at work in order to dedicate it to looking after the children. So there are many elements, and salary is one of the aspects. And then, of course, equality and doing away with discrimination, all these aspects that we have to continue working on so that time management becomes more egalitarian, less discriminatory, and there is this co-responsibility. So the public powers have to work on these policies, and I think that's going to be really key. Thank you very much for your comments. And we're almost at the end of this roundtable, but I would like to comment upon some of the extremely interesting things we've heard. First of all, this idea of the need to go more slowly, to slow down. We all need to do this and really be aware of the need to stop in order to implement new ways of life. And also the gender aspect, which has come up in all the sessions that we've been hearing today, and also the cross-cutting perspective, this need that for time use policies that have to affect all the areas of management and all the spheres of life. Now, we've very clearly seen that that structure of timetables, 8 working, 8 free time and 8 resting, is completely obsolete. We have to rethink it in detail, and that is precisely one of the challenges of the 21st century, to restructure the time spent at work in order to make it better for everyone and more productive too, and will benefit the society as a whole. And then this interesting idea of living without an eye on the watch, as children do, and the right to time that of young people too. They also have right to it. And this last idea, a better management of time will mean more freedom for all of us. So we'll have more time to live, basically. Thank you very much to all of you for your presentation, your comments. It's been a pleasure to share this roundtable, even if it's across the distance, and I hope to see you soon. Thank you.